Ideal mesmo para o mundo atual seria fazer o ensino médio junto com o curso técnico, certo? É no Senac que o aluno tem autonomia de verdade, formação cidadã, foco na diversidade, preparação para o Enem, material didático sem taxas e muito mais. Na real, tem tudo que você precisa para se sentir preparado para a vida. Seja para entrar no mundo do trabalho ou te ajudar a decidir o que fazer na faculdade. Quer saber? Senac. Vem comigo. Acesse sp.senac.br/ensino-médio-técnico.
Imagine like going to a bar when we were in when say I was like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you met me at a bar, I would just be another sort of cool chick. But actually that day I delivered 4 babies and I'd been running around with blood and amniotic fluid on my clogs, and I'd gone home and changed into so it's, you can't fathom. But of course, like with anything, when you do it a lot of times, you can become depersonalized from it until something serious is happening, and it's suddenly like in that moment there's a mother that's about to die, or there's a baby whose life's at risk. And I think in general, again, doctors are humans. Everything becomes, and when you have to do work so intensely and so hard, you become a bit like a robot. But every time that moment when a baby's about to be born, you're present again.
Life is made up of millions of tiny moments. I believe that one of our tasks as humans is to be present for as many of them as possible. When we reflect on the unforgettable events or incredible memories in our lives, zoom in, and there will be these little moments before or after the event that sit in our heart space. The moment you knew things would never be the same again. The hour you felt the shift. The minute that saved your life, or the second that changed it. These are the moments that build movements. Sometimes they are global, and other times it's just the simple first step to change. Join me as I uncover these moments with my inspiring, innovative, and extraordinary guests. Hello everyone, I'm Emmeline Mondo, and this is Mondo Moments. In this episode, I speak to the exceptional Dr. Stephanie Kuku. She has over 15 years of clinical and research experience and has trained and worked at the NHS and HCA as a surgical oncologist specialising in women's cancers. During her clinical career, Dr. Kuku sat on council for the British Gynecological Cancer Society and was awarded numerous international travelling fellowships. Dr. Kuku is also an angel investor and sits on a healthcare investment committee advising on deal flow and due diligence. She contributes to advisory boards across the health sector and provides advisory consultancy to a range of organisations. She is currently a senior advisor and consultant in clinical AI at the World Health Organization's Department of Digital Health and Innovation. Now, when I think of Dr. Kuku, I think of her essence, and I imagine spring fields and daffodils and tulips. When I met her at a dinner that I organised, I was moved by her gentle yet sturdy presence. She was very fabulous, but also just very grounded and intriguing. But I know that you don't become a doctor by just being floral and light and like daffodils. I know there's a lot of hard work to become who she is. I wanted to get to the soul behind the science. And so I asked Stephanie to come and join me for a few moments. I hope you enjoy this. Thank you for joining me, Stephanie. How are you?
Great. It's so nice to be here. I love that introduction. Tulips, I think. I think so many. I love what you said about gentle and sturdy, because I do think there are gentle moments, but most people don't see the gentle moments. I think very few people can pick up on what's underneath the surface that we all put on. But yes, there is some gentle in there sometimes.
Well, I mean, on that, because when I was writing that, I thought, I wonder if she'll hate that description, thinking, I've got hard shit to do. Why is she saying that I'm like tulips and daffodils? But I mean, I feel with you a sense of lightness that I think is really difficult to cultivate when you work in the profession that you do. So I would actually like to start with that, being a woman in science, in tech, and with your medical background. How was that, and how have you explored that femininity in such a masculine
I love
world?
that question. It's so interesting. I'm currently trying to write about my experiences within medicine and science and why I eventually sort of transitioned out to being in hospitals. I think that I don't know if you know what the trends are now, but women are actually more likely to be drawn to science than they ever were before, but actually in healthcare, which is seen now more as a caring profession. In the old days, it was more of a sort of noble man's job. And I think things are changing the
Yeah.
perception of what healthcare is. Healthcare isn't science and men in suits and surgery. Healthcare is now more holistic and preventative, or at least that's where we're trying to get to. So it's interesting because, of course, when I went to medical school all the way back in, 1998, it was very, without realizing, it was very much of a different culture. It was a different time. It was before,
Mm.
I think, the internet came in whilst I was in medical school. And
Wow. Wait, that's really big, right? So all of your studying was done with physically going to do the
going to
research,
the
get the
library,
books.
and I think
Going to the
I
library.
recall the fourth year of medical school using the internet. And it's a really interesting story because the first time I remember using the internet was to find help. And it was through that process that I found a mentor, a woman who's still my mentor today. And it's really interesting because at the time, just going back to your question, thinking about my place in healthcare, in medicine, and deciding at that time, I think I want to do surgery and I want to do cancer. And then thinking, can I really do this? It's such a male, white world. And
Sorry to stop you. Can we just go back to that? The moment when you decided you want to do science and you want to go into the medical field, what age were you?
God, I think I was about 16. But, we can all debate now, looking back, whether we don't decide. I mean, the age at which we decide what we want to start our lives with, what career we want to start with, is the case for some of us. Or the age at which you pursue an interest or a vocation or a passion or a skill you already know you have. It's really interesting now, thinking back, looking at the world the way it is now, and thinking, how can you decide what you want to do with your life at 16 when, I barely knew who I was at 35, let alone at 16. But for me, it was 16, and that's because science was what I was good at. I was throughout, I had a very creative mother who had a doctor father who wasn't at all impressed, which is very the opposite of sort of African families are supposed to love the whole lawyer, doctor, banker. But my mother, in retrospect, I think she rarely saw her father, and clearly he had a very unhealthy relationship with work, and that projected that really kind of didn't do very well for him and family because he was a mess family wise, but he was a very successful doctor. So in many respects, he wasn't my inspiration at all. I just felt that I was only good at science, but I was really interested in the creative world. But that if I did medicine, at least I'd be helping people and at least I'd always have a job. I remember thinking that. It wasn't kind of, this is a calling, I want to do that. It was more, what am I interested in? What is safe? What am I good at? Science. And what is safe? What's a good profession? What is seen as noble? What is, I was influenced not by, because I didn't know who I was, but I was very much, I can say this now, looking back, I was influenced by what I thought would please people around me, what would motivate my parents to invest more in me. I don't know. It's a really tricky one now, looking back and thinking about, I'm still figuring out what I want to do. I have a lot and I'm just getting started. So it's an interesting question. I don't know I can answer it.
So you arrive at medical school and, let's say because it's 5 years, is it 5 years?
4 years, you can do an extra
year.
Your level? But it was 5 years. I was at Bristol. It's 5 years.
5 years in, and how does it feel to be, let's say in the last year, having seen your fellow classmates and knowing what you've learned, are you feeling excited as, a young medical student, to step into the world, or are you already kind of thinking, I don't know about this
No,
space?
if I recall, I was excited. I was excited to be a doctor. I was excited to not be a student anymore, and I was excited to really go in and be on. I hate the word frontline, but just do things and to be practical. And money.
Yeah,
So after 5
yeah.
years of medical school, you're kind of, you're ready to sort of be an adult. I was excited, and I know a lot of people who within the first 2 years, the first year, kind of felt like, okay, this is okay, but it's not all that it's hyped up to be, and there's a lot. They knew then this is a lot of self-sacrifice.
Okay, so let's do a super fast forward, because I know from the 15 years experience that you've had in the NHS, as we've described, and now stepping into the role that you're in, you've had a myriad of internal shifts, external changes. And I want to know about the point that you started to think that it was time to leave the NHS, to leave the role that you had been in, and the visions that you had.
Such an interesting question, because, the journey was one that took a lot of time. You almost have to. I never started, and I think this is so important when I look at the world now and people who come to me, a lot of young women come to me for advice, not just people in science, people in tech, people who are building businesses, who are looking for investment. They want advice to how to plan their careers. And I think that one thing I always say is, I never thought about the end point. Whether you're an actor, whether you're a lawyer or a doctor or a banker, there is always this sort of, I need to get to partner. I need to become this. I never saw that.
The lead.
And it's so funny, because one of our mutual friends, the girl, Yomi, who introduced us, always said, and, I think back now, looking retrospectively, she says, I met you, we met at the hairdresser. I met you, I just looked at you, across at you, and I just thought, this girl just looks so free.
Yes, this is a wonderful,
because it's so funny, but I didn't know that. I didn't know for a long time that within me there was this sort of someone who worked and functioned in strict order, someone who needed structure, yet that structure had to be within a sphere of chaos and possibility and creativity. And so medicine's an interesting one, because it is chaos, yet it is order. Because I chose to do women's health, and we'll come to talk about women's health later, because I chose to do women's health, I spent my 20s and early 30s mostly delivering babies. I don't know if you've read that book, This Is Going to Hurt. It's from a very male perspective. It's very raw. You're seeing women of all races, ages, you're delivering babies, it's night shifts, it's intense. And at some point halfway through, I always knew I wanted to do surgery. And of course, you do see cesarean sections and that surgery. But I always knew I was interested in cancer. So I went into women's health actually really knowing that I wanted to look after women with cancer. But you have to do the whole journey. And there is something about looking after women that makes you mirror, look in, look for yourself. Look for yourself within the context of society and women's roles. You're delivering babies every day. You're a young woman from 26 and then 28 and then 32. Imagine that's your job, to look after, see women in fertility clinics, to see women with sort of period problems who are talking about how it affects their work or their relationships. And as a woman, every day you're trying to define who you are. And so as time went on, I just wanted to enjoy the experience. And that's why I did things. I traveled, I lived in Paris. So I went to see medicine and women's health in other places. But ultimately, as I drew to what would be the pinnacle, like, okay, right, I'm made partner, I'm a consultant, or, you hear so many actors say you win the Oscar and then you suddenly get this downer.
Yeah. I've heard that.
It's a crossroad, we have to kind of think that, someone aspiring to be an actress and someone aspiring to be a doctor, a surgeon, is it really that different? Yes, medicine is very old school, is very male dominated, but how is that different in the acting world? The gender pay gaps in medicine, the gender pay gaps in acting. It's interesting, but I think that the shifts happen when you start to look for yourself. It's something that you did. When you start to look for yourself, and if, like me and a lot of young women are, as the world, as it gets more complex. So we talk about modern women. The modern woman shot herself in the foot because it's all so confusing. We want everything. But as you start to truly look for yourself, not who you think you should be, not who society thinks you should be, who you truly are, which is based on your experiences, your passions, your loves, your learning, then there is a natural course. I think it was Oprah that said, people asked her about that moment. And she said something like, and I so related to it because at some point I was doing something magnanimous. I was looking after women. I was cutting out cancer. I was helping these women. But inside there's a force dragging me in the opposite direction to sort of find more. It didn't mean that I was completely moving away from where I was, but I was taking what I had done and what I'd learned, and I was sort of expanding it in a different realm, in a freer realm. And again, I try and speak in a way that whatever you do, it relates. We're all the same at the end of the day.
Seeing that connect is incredible. I want to just take you back before we move. You've opened up like a beautiful box there, but that process of birthing babies, like seeing babies come into the life. One of the reasons I just want to zoom in to you, having been someone who's been there, a woman who's been in the room for that, is I always imagine that childbirth is the one moment where science and spirit are actually present. And you can't deny, sometimes, faith, people who are extremely spiritual, people who are really sciencey can clash. But I think everyone can agree, in those moments, there's a complete merging of having that deep scientific understanding of what's going on, but knowing that there is something greater in the room to cause life. And, you've touched on it a little bit, but did you always feel a sense of that? Or did it quite quickly become, another birth, another baby's in the room? Or did it always kind of take your breath away?
It takes your breath away. You feel the responsibility and the weight. It's mostly amazing and uncomplicated. And of course, as doctors, we would be called in when things were sort of going wrong. So my memories are that once the novelty and the amazement of what went on. I mean, imagine going to a bar when we were when say I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you met me at a bar, I would just be another sort of cool chick. But actually that day I delivered 4 babies and I'd been running around with blood and amniotic fluid on my clogs, and I'd gone home and changed into so it's, you can't fathom. But of course, like with anything, when you do it a lot of times, you can become depersonalized from it until something serious is happening, and it's suddenly in that moment, there's a mother that's about to die, or there's a baby whose life's at risk. And I think in general, again, doctors are humans, everything becomes, and when you have to do work so intensely and so hard, you become a bit like a robot. But every time that moment when a baby's about to be born, you're present again. And that's the difference.
Yeah.
And you do know that it's a completely spiritual, natural moment that isn't perfect. So the science is on standby.
That isn't perfect.
Science is on standby. Yeah. And sometimes it's just, I remember once this woman coming in the middle of the night, she had a bit of pain, but there was no bleeding, and the tracing, the baby monitor, there was an instinct. I just knew that something was wrong. It wasn't sort of the signs, open signs there weren't scientifically enough to, say this baby needs to come out. But there was some science, but there was also strong instinct that something was wrong. And we took her for a C-section, and I opened up and the baby was swimming in blood. She'd had something called a placental abruption where the placenta comes out. So, I mean, that kind of thing. And sometimes there was a brilliant obstetrician I worked with, Bryony, and I remember once she said something like, obstetrics delivering babies, it's 80% confidence and just believing in the process. 20% fear. It's interesting. The fear. And, for me, the fear is, this is something higher than us and science. That's why you have to have a fear, because anything could go wrong. Even things beyond our control, with all the the science and the monitors to see what's going on with the baby and to deliver it, things still go wrong. So it was great. But, again, I never wanted to deliver babies. I wanted to look after women with cancer. To do that, having that respect and responsibility and having to go through that, understanding women. And again, if you think about it, how can you treat women with cancers without really knowing women's cancers, ovarian cancers, cervical cancers, without understanding the true role of those organs that have then turned to cancer to the other side? Does that make sense? I like to call it the reproductive lifespan of a woman. So I looked after babies and then a bit in between of sort of looking after women's health and then doing cancer, which was always my interest because I'm a bit of a nerd and I wanted to do cancer research. So yeah, I loved it. Just got to a point where I felt that, as Oprah said, I felt a force pulling me in another direction. And you have to listen to that force because then if you don't, your potential, and again, society just defines people by their role descriptions. Your life is a summation of the experience and how much of the nooks and crannies of your personality and your soul that you've opened up. If anyone had told me 5 years ago when I was like, I love my job, I'm cutting out cancer in women, I'm sick. There's a girl who is a friend now, and she was my age, 37, when I took out her ovaries, tubes, uterus, because she had a cancer. She was my age. I was taking out the organ of a woman who would, knowing she would never have children. She was my age. And I think I was like single at the time thinking, oh my God. Yes, sometimes it's about fulfilling your potential. And it doesn't mean ticking boxes, as society says, about success. It is finding things you wouldn't otherwise find in yourself if you don't go off tangent. You're still in this one path. We need doctors. Look at us. We need people who are on one path forever. Those are the Nobel Prize. The people who made the vaccine, who are, but some of us are not one path, what I call, unidimensional. Some of us want polymaths with
got different callings. I would like, before we move on, and I know we're getting closer to the big U, the shift within self, and I can't wait to get there. I think a lot of people listening to this would have been affected by cancer, and it's a disease that is so rampant across the globe, and of course you've worked with it intimately and in great detail throughout your career. What are your thoughts about the possibilities of change, about how we are treating and dealing with cancer in the mainstream medical field? And by that I mean the chemotherapies and all of the therapies that are currently used in hospitals. Do you believe that we're very close to that changing into something that looks like way less cancers than we're seeing?
That's such a difficult question to answer. I think that, 1 in 4 of us will get some sort of cancer. Why?
That's such a high statistic. It doesn't feel okay to. I find it hard to accept that.
If you think about it, cancer is mostly, in the most part, let's take away the childhood leukemias. In the most part, cancer is mostly a disease of aging. So if you think about things degenerate, our joints degenerate, we get arthritis, our skin ages because of the sun and other things, we get laxity, things degenerate, the cells start to malfunction so that you get more mistakes in them. But ultimately, has there been in the last century an acceleration of that aging, degeneration, transformation of cells into malignant process because of something that we're doing? Look at the big nuclear disasters, and look at this, the chemical induced cancers, for example. We know that certain things are more likely to cause cells to go awry. And we also know that even though we know that there are some genes, I did an Instagram post the other day about Angelina Jolie's genetic and inheritable risks of breast and ovarian cancer, which is why I decided to take out a breast and ovaries. But at the same time, in the grand scheme of things, if you look at all the cancers, most people don't have gene. It's environmental, it's diet, it's pollutants, it's toxins. So Are things changing? Well, I think people are more aware of their health. I think the medicine is finally realizing that it needs to move out of the old ages. I think the pandemic is going to be a huge tipping point for prevention. Like, why we wait,
Yeah.
prevention, investing in things, in diagnostics to really pick things up super, super early. Making sure that that is universally available. We know cancer treatments aren't equal. I mean, nothing is equal in this world, but it's universally available because you can reduce cancer risk in some parts of the world and not in other parts.
So the experience, say, if you were in a private hospital in the UK versus the NHS, are you getting the same treatment as someone who's paying?
That. I think that because private hospitals don't collect their data, it's hard. But look at the States, insurance systems. You can't compare outcomes but in general, treatments are fairly the same. What the NHS aims to do is offer the best available, cost-effective treatment. Chemotherapy has been around for a long time, and that's what's happening now is we're seeing more innovative treatments and experimental drugs. In 10 years, there might be something that completely throws chemotherapy away, but it's about time that there is something else other than chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting there. There are things like immune modulating anti-cancer therapeutics, things that are probably available already on an experimental level for some. By the time there is the research evidence and it is made affordable, it would be more available widely. So I think cancer is one that, again, I'm very hopeful that this pandemic has made people realize what we should be investing in.
Both on an individual level and, government level,
population level, on a system level, on a policy level. It's all about government.
Yeah.
I mean, you can spend billions on defense. Yes, you have to protect us against enemies. But a tenth of what we spend on things that aren't as important as our public health. If anyone could go back now and say to any of the international governments, you could foresee this pandemic, this virus that was going to change all our lives, they would have invested more prevention and communicable diseases. Exactly. So, I mean, cancer, it's a heavy one.
Yeah, it is really heavy, and it's also difficult to sort of begin to unpick in a surface way. I know there's so much you can say about it. I'm going to ask you another possibly quite difficult question to ask in a short amount of time. Again, I'm just thinking about what people might be thinking about in this moment. Knowing what you know and what you've gone through, is there whether it's a way of living, a lifestyle choice, apart from smoking, which is obvious, something that you think people often miss out on in regards to preventing or being an aid to avoiding any sort of extreme situations with cancers or disease, particularly women, but also everyone? Is there any? I think stress is a big one, but I'd love to know what comes to mind.
We all have that sort of chronic low-grade stress at the moment with the pandemic. There are some things you're not going to be able to manage. I think there's some things that some people can manage better than others. I manage stress better than the person who can't afford to have a coach, to have acupuncture, to have a massage, So, I mean, stress is difficult. It's so difficult because it's a conundrum. The people who are less disadvantaged and less privileged will always be at higher risk of ill health. Face it. Let's be really honest. A good doctor friend of mine in San Francisco, when we talk about health inequalities, he'll say things like, but Stephanie, the access to good housing, good food, and good education aren't equal. Why do you expect health outcomes to be equal? And he says this is someone who runs a big food charity in a downtown San Francisco.
Yeah.
So he's somebody who understands the problem, is trying to help. The fact is that there are so many levels of trying to say on a collective population level, yes, there are things that we could do, health education awareness, but on an individual level, it's individual. Your risk is very much based on your class and race and ethnicity and geography and postcode. So what can we all do? We can try and live a balanced life, a healthy life, as healthy as possible.
Are you do eat meat, or
I don't really
any views
eat.
on that?
I eat everything except pork and Marmite.
I hate Marmite too.
Everything except pork, Marmite, pork, Marmite, and white bread, which is actually not that true because I do eat white bread sometimes. And he went, great, so I'll make you a pork and Marmite sandwich. It sounds wonderful.
Oh my gosh, that is hellish. That's so funny. White bread and Marmite and pork. That is like, I'd say my top 3 most hated things. Now that you've said them together,
I'm very balanced, and I'm not a big fan of alcohol, but occasionally I have a drink, and recently in the last sort of 3 months, I have, say, a drink a week, but in general, I am balanced. I think exercise has been the thing that I have learnt in the last 2 years that's really important. I walk everywhere, but I don't do that exercise that is about muscle strength. About releasing endorphins in your brain so that I'm less anxious and stressed with all the work that I have to do.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't. Some people are just, they're used to exercise. I try and do yoga now, and I walk a lot. I've always walked a lot, and that's enough. But I now see the need for this sort of cardiovascular. I love getting on the bikes and cycling, but again, that depends on weather because of my hair. Even my partner is white, my white friend. People, you understand the hair thing. It's so funny for anyone who knows me to see me suddenly jogging. As a doctor, we'd say there were certain groups of people who are less likely to exercise. Middle-aged Arab people. My mother is the classic. Those kind of people. We're like, and even my mother was like, my gym guy's coming to the house. I'm walking. She calls the personal trainer her gym guy.
I love it. So good.
Again, it starts from prevention, starts from the individual. And you can't tell me there aren't people who are living on nothing, that aren't trying their best to trying to live healthy lives. You're not going to be able to manage the stress if you have to worry about where your next meal is coming from. But it's so vast to think about it. I don't want to be exclusive in that sense and say it is obvious that it is not hard if you're in a position of relative privilege. Just do the best you can.
Yeah.
And the best you can is balance. Yeah. Balance, diet, exercise. I grew up on a really crappy diet and now I'm balanced, but you wouldn't find me eating processed meats from a package, I try my best.
So we are in the realm of the body and getting into the body, and I really want to begin this delving deeper into your shift. So when we last spoke, I said to you that when we first met at the dinner, and you were, I think you were just about to leave. You were planning your exit at the NHS, maybe.
Was this March 2018, International Women's Day?
2018, exactly. And you were, as any doctor is, most doctors are really in the science, having a deep gratitude for the work that you've done, but wanting to shift and break out into your own projects, your own business. But one of the things I was curious about was your sort of spiritual practice. And everyone who knows me, I'm always curious about are you meditating? Are you yogaing? And it feels as though, particularly when I connected with you recently, there's been a connect back to this sense of spirit, and a growth and a change there. And I wonder if you want to touch on that. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think 2018, there's always that year where your life truly changes, isn't there?
Thank you for listening to The Delivery Room, Our Wombs and Life with Dr. Stephanie Kuku. There is so much more to come in part 2, so please stay tuned. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please remember to like, share, and subscribe.